Good morning, everybody, or almost good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar, The Family System and its newest member, technology. This is one that I'm very personally interested in, along with everything else that we've done, but this is something that we struggle with in my family quite regularly, so I'm really interested to see what Stephanie has to say about it today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping issues. We have a couple handouts in here. So if you go to the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the two handouts we had from our last week's mindfulness webinar, as well as an additional handout that Stephanie put together, and a couple of things, shameless marketing from Score at the top. If you have any audio difficulties during today's webinar, just click on the audio tab and you can choose to dial in by phone. I've had to do it once or twice myself. It works just fine. It just takes a couple seconds to get it all set up. And if that doesn't work, just shoot me an email or message me on the chat through the GoToWebinar, and I'll see if I can help you troubleshoot the problem. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please send them in. Again, there's a questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. You can submit them there. After Stephanie's presentation or chat with us, she will be answering the questions. I will have some questions, but if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I just wanted to send out a quick poll for everybody here. Just you can give us an idea of who you are. Here we go. So if you guys can give us a couple, it shouldn't take longer than a second to give us this. Just trying to get an idea of who's on there. We got half the people who voted so far. A couple more votes and we'll be done. It looks like, I don't know if we're going to get the full 100% this time, but we got 50%. We're 50% parent and 50% other. All right, and let me see. That's the only poll I have for this one. Just wanted to get an idea of who's on the line. So let me tell you about Stephanie Burstein. Stephanie Burstein is a licensed marriage and family therapist who counsels children, young adults, and families. She specializes in helping people struggling with challenging life transitions, social skills, depression, personality disorders, anxiety, and parent coaching. During therapy, Stephanie creates a safe and open environment where her clients and families can feel comfortable exploring their troubles, behaviors, and emotions. She draws on a variety of skills and therapeutic methods, including DBT, expressive therapy, family systems therapy, and more. And she works with my family personally in helping us develop better communication in our household. So I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie, and I'm going to turn my screen off and turn my camera off and let her take it from there. Stephanie?
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
if you need to share your screen, just let me know and I will give you permission to share your screen.
Okay, perfect. I mean, the handout that I have, you can follow along with the presentation because I'm going to use that as like the guideline for the presentation. So I actually came up with this talk because over and over again in family therapy, I had so many parents coming in and asking me so many questions about technology and what they need to do. And they were so hyper focused on technology and it causing all these issues and what to do that they were missing the bigger picture, which is actually communication and relating to your child with technology. So I am going to give you guys some tips on what to do, but I'm also going to show a different perspective of technology and how to communicate more effectively so technology doesn't get in the way of your relationship with your child. It actually can bring you guys closer together. So the first thing, there's 4 themes that I want you guys to think about when you're thinking about setting limits with kids or introducing technology to your child if you haven't given them a phone yet. So the first thing is your parent and tech relationship and realizing that technology is not the enemy. So I want you guys to check in with yourselves and think, you know, what is your relationship with technology? How often are you on the phone? How often is your phone near you? How often are you on your iPad around your kids? Do you have a workspace? How often are you engaged in actual mindful conversation? So with how busy our world is now, and especially because of COVID, it's so easy to have our phones with us, be on FaceTime with family members, friends, and actually not be present because we feel like we have all this time on our hands when really, you know, our kids are still there, our lives are still happening, but we don't have like that outside connection that we used to have in the outside community. So we're trying to bring that community in, and it can feel like we're on technology a lot more now. And identifying, do you have an area, if you are working from home, do you have an area that's specifically for work? And this is really great thinking as the school year starting, because your kids, most of the kids are probably going to be virtual. And if they are going to be virtual, you want them to also have a space to work in, and a space where you know that this technology is okay to have in this space when you're doing schoolwork, but maybe not your phone. And for parents, it helps model that, hey, if I'm going to be answering emails or I'm going to be focused on a work call, I'm going to be in this space. So the kids know that if they need you or they need to ask you something, that you might not be able to answer them right away because you're at work. So it's not that you're ignoring them because you're on the technology or you're emailing or whatnot, but they know that this is the space that you're working. So this issue has actually come up more and more as COVID has like started, is that kids will tell me that their parents are worried about them being on their phone, but then, you know, they're like, well, my parents are on the phone too, so it's not really fair. And even though the parents are like, well, I'm working, but they don't know, right? So if you're in the kitchen answering an email and your kid's talking to you or your kid sees you on the phone, they don't see the difference between it being work or just being on the phone. So the behaviors that you can model are having appropriate limits with your phone and having appropriate areas where you're going to be doing work and the child knows it's work. So when school starts, they have that same platform. And then the other question that I want you guys to ask yourself is, are you parenting from a place of fear when it comes to technology, which is so easy to do. And I don't blame parents for coming from this place of fear, because there's so much what if, and there's so much fear of, well, if, you know, if my child's gaming and somebody talks to them that they don't know, or, you know, they get into a relationship with somebody that can be harmful, or what kind of bullying is happening. You know, a lot of parents' fear is not actually so much strangers. It's more of, you know, what are the kids talking about? What are they learning? You know, like I said, a lot of the bullying does happen virtually. So when they were at school, they're coming home, and then bullying would be happening online too. So they never had a moment where they didn't feel like they didn't feel safe, right? So it's being bullied at school, being bullied at home. So parents rightfully have this fear, but if you're coming at technology from this place of fear and this place of it's bad, you're already going to be in a struggle for control with your kids, because your kids are like, well, no, technology is okay, social media is okay, gaming's okay. And if you're like, no, it's bad, you're already on opposite ends of the spectrum. And what I find is that most parents are either on this very rigid end where there's a lot of rules for technology, or parents who are like, okay, let's give my kids the technology, let's see what happens. So it's too big of a spectrum. I want to move in closer and be somewhere in the middle. So the goal in this parent-tech relationship is for you to be open and honest with yourself about your use and how you're modeling behavior, so you can talk to your kids. And, you know, if you notice like, hey, I actually am using my phone a lot today, and say to them, you know, I realize if my phone's near me and I go to it, I'll go to my email even though I don't want to check my email. So you're letting them know that it's not just them because they're kids, it's what technology does to us. You know, I know that when I go on vacation, I have to move my email little box somewhere else because I will automatically go there and check, even though I don't want to check my email. So being open and honest with them is going to help them be open and honest with you. So the overarching goal in this talk is to be non-judgmental and be curious, so you can set the appropriate limits and have better communication with your kids about technology. The next theme is the parent-child relationship. So if you are already struggling in a relationship with your child, if they're in that teenage, you know, the fight for control, which is normal because they're wanting autonomy, and then you're trying to set all these limits, you don't want technology to get in the way of your relationship. You want to be able to build a relationship with trust, so then you can actually together set the limits. So I want you guys to think about what does time together look like for you and your family? You know, are you guys only together when you're doing chores? Are you only together, you know, the car to and from school? If you are together, is it fun, or is it, you know, you telling your child you need to do X, Y, and Z? Are you setting purposeful time? So if you are all busy and there's a lot of kids in the family and everybody's running around, do you have at least one day a week where you're doing an activity together as a family? Ideally, kids, as they get older, they're going to push back on family time. So the best thing to do is to actually find short periods of time throughout the week that you can invite the child down, or you can invite the child out of their room. because they have multiple opportunities. They don't have to come out of the room all the time. But if if they like baking, it might be that you bring them down to help you bake something, even if it's just for 20 minutes. Movie nights are great, but movies can also be 2 to 3 hours. And, most teenagers don't want to spend that much time with their parents, and that's okay in one sitting. So I actually find having a TV show that you're watching together as a family more effective, because that can be anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. And it's a quick sit down, and then you have something to talk about later on. And then are you having meals together? Having dinner together is so important, and being able to all be down in one area, no phones, no technology, and not talking about things that are stressful. So this is like not the time to ask them what their grades are, what's happening in school, what tests are coming up, did they clean their room? It's a time to just be curious with them and find out what is going on in their lives, what's going on in their friends' lives, and try to kind of get into their mindset and validate their emotions. The other big theme in this theme is to validate. So your child is going to struggle with technology. They're going to struggle with time. It's just going to happen. I mean, we all, if we're all honest with ourselves, we all struggle with that. So you want to be able to validate their emotions. And it's important to remember, validating their emotion does not mean you're validating the behavior. So a big example I have is if a kid is having a hard time waking up and the parent knows that they were on their phone late at night, they might be, more of the I told you so, or not have compassion for them. Which might make sense, but at the same time, they are still struggling. So you want to be able to identify, like, I know you're really tired, and we can talk about what we can do when you get home from school, but you need to get up, right? You need to be able to function. But if you're fighting with them and saying it's because you were on your phone all night, they're not going to get out of bed. You're going to be in a battle. So it's better to focus on the emotion, validate them, and then later on set the limit or talk about the phone use. If you're always going into the technology use of the phone use, you're going to lose them. The minute you bring up the phone, social media, gaming, they're going to click off. They're going to get defensive. And then I think about your time with the child and how much time are you spending preaching versus connecting. So I notice how a lot of parents are always trying to find something to teach their kid, or always trying to, when they identify something that needs to be tweaked, they're going to point out all these things that need to be changed a lot of the time. So the kids aren't going to want to come down and spend time with you if you're constantly saying, hey, you need to do this, or did you do your homework? Did you clean your room? There needs to be times where you're just the parent. So this is where building your community is really helpful. Now, right now, you can't build that outside in-person community. You can build a community with people like family members. If you have coaches or tutors, if your child is into sports or arts, they might be able to still be doing these activities, maybe socially distanced or even virtually. The awesome part about having an outside community is that you don't always have to be the bad guy. You have people on your side and on your team that are helping you co-parent. There's a lot of research on this. Dan Siegel, who's done a lot of research with the adolescent brain and mindfulness, actually really advocates creating that community of adults for your kids. So they have other adults that you trust and they can trust to go to. The next thing that I want to talk about is tips to help you guys build that relationship. So the first thing is conversations in the car, especially after school. Car is not the time to have a conversation, especially after school. Imagine you coming home from an 8-hour day, getting in the car and somebody grilling you about your day. You're not going to like that, right? So kids don't like it either. They feel trapped as well in the car. So if you start to ask them all these questions and you start to try to figure out what they're doing, and then you yell at them because they're listening to music on their phone or they're on their phone, it's going to spiral out of control. And then for you, it's important to know that you're not really having mindful conversation in the car. It might feel that way because you might think you have like their full attention because they're in the car and they're not at home and they can't walk away. But you're not really being mindful because you're driving, as well as trying to have these serious conversations. So that's like the one thing you guys can take away from this, is try not to have those serious conversations in the car, because they're not going to go well. The next thing is, like I said, make family time fun and short throughout the week. So there's multiple opportunities for the kids to come down and engage with the family and engage with you. And like I said, you want to build that community for support. So if you have the ability to pull in other adults, or you have those other adults, also let them know if you're struggling with the phone time with the kids. Let them know, like, hey, I'm noticing that I can't get the kids off the phone, or I'm really worried because they are spending, over 6 to 7 hours on the phone. So, can I do an extra class with you or something, something along those lines. But also the teacher or the coach or the tutor might be more aware and then might actually call them out if they're on the phone, or maybe previously they might have like ignored it half the time, but they might be more present on the idea of the child using the phone during that activity. So the goal here is to build trust within your relationship so you can set limits collaboratively with your children. The ultimate goal is, as you give your kids the phone or you give your kids the gaming system, that you give it to them and you talk about the limits together and you come up with the limits together. This is going to be the most effective way to set limits. If you wait for something to happen and then you set the limits, it's going to be a fight for control. It's going to be a battle. And then it's actually, and if you haven't given your kid a phone or your kid's still young, like in the elementary, early middle school, you still have the ability to make the phone like a fun privilege. So it's, you start off with the phone and you have this much time. And if you show me that you can handle it, then I'll increase your time versus taking it away. So they're working towards having more privileges with their phone. They're working towards being able to have social media. Because if your kid's going to come to you and there's a problem, then you don't have to be so fearful, right, of what's going on behind the scenes on the phone. And the third thing is the child-technology relationship. So your kids are going to have a relationship with technology, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. So, and especially now because of COVID. So I know my screen time has increased, and what I've noticed with a lot of my clients when I do, I'll do random screen time checks with my clients, especially like the ones that have phone issues or have social media issues. And I've noticed that theirs also has gone up. But when I look individually as to what they're doing, it's not all like TikTok. It's, it's actually a lot of FaceTime and a lot of iMessaging that's also going up. So you actually want to look at screen time and look at each individual app and look at how much time they're spending, because it's not the time, it's what they're doing and who they're doing it with, right? So if your child is being secretive with their phone, if your child is, every time you come by, they're like hiding their phone, or they don't ever let you walk behind them to see what's happening, if they've changed the passwords on their phone without telling you, these are all signs of secretive use. And that's a red flag. Up until high school, you really should be able to get into your kid's phone when you want to. You should be able to get into their social media. Once the kids get into high school, it begins to shift a little bit because you want your kids to have autonomy. And you have 4 short years before your kids go away to college, and you really want them to build healthy relationships because you're not going with them to college and the phone is going with them. And if you have all these strict rules, it doesn't really matter, because by the time that they leave for college, they're going to just not using it as rules because they're not really respectful of the rules or they don't understand them. So does your child take their phone everywhere with them? If your child can't go out to dinner without having their phone on them, or if they leave their phone in the car or at home, what's their reaction? If their reaction is very intense, or they make you turn around to get the phone because they left it, that's also a sign that there's too much of an attachment to the phone. You want to pay attention to how attached they are to the technology. And how negatively do they react if you do take the phone away? So if you've set a limit with them and they've broken, their promise with what they're going to do, when you take the phone away, they're going to have a reaction. The phone is their social life. That's how, especially now because of COVID, they're connecting with people through gaming, through social media, through FaceTime, through Snapchat. So if you take it away, you are taking away their connection. And, so you want them to be, they're going to be upset, but you don't want them to be so upset that they don't talk to you for a long period of time. They hurt themselves, they hurt property. Or they're just out of control, where you as a parent are fearful to then take the phone again the next time. And has your child participated in any behaviors that are not safe? So behaviors that are not safe to me are, there's the obvious behaviors, but if they are using the phone to connect with people, to do things that you don't approve of, to sneak out of the house, for the older kids to plan a party behind your back, to do anything that if they knew that you wouldn't approve of, to me, that's an unsafe behavior, because now the phone is in a way just to connect. It's a way to connect to do something that's not effective, that can get them in trouble or hurt them. And how much drama does the phone cause? So if your child is constantly fighting with people, or there's a constant issue with bullying or constant issue with a parent calling you because of the phone, that's also a sign that the phone's not being used for the right reasons. So pay attention to how much drama they're talking about, or how much drama are you feeling that you're getting back from parents. And then again, like I said, pay attention to screen time. And I'm not giving an exact time. I did say 6 or 7 hours. I think after 7 hours, you're really like, that's a long time to be on the phone. But because of COVID, I've noticed that some of my kids have been on the phone for that long. But I also noticed they're on like YouTube learning to do things for an hour or two at a time. And to me, again, like if you look at what they're doing and who they're doing it with, learning something on YouTube isn't effective. It's effective, right? Spending an hour or two on Netflix and binging completely, or even 3 hours on Netflix, is more of a distraction and mind numbing. So that's more of a behavior that I wouldn't want to see. 2 to 3 hours on TikTok, also not okay, because it's just like that mind numbing distraction. You really want them to be doing things where they're learning or gaining an experience from it. So that's for the screen time. And I know that Apple products they break down the screen time with the apps, and I'm pretty sure some of the Androids do as well too. So I talked a little bit about the in-person community and how that can be helpful. Right now, in-person community doesn't really exist because of COVID, but I do know that a lot of sports teams and some art groups are doing some virtual Zooms, and some of them, if they're able to do outside and social distance, I think that's a really great thing to do as well too, depending on how you guys feel safe. But you want them to have a community, so after COVID is over, they're not starting from scratch. You want them to be able to still stay in touch somewhat with their friends from school. You don't have to ask them every day, hey, did you talk to your friends from school? But you want to make sure that they've stayed in contact with people so they don't feel so lonely afterwards. And if we weren't in COVID, what I would say to you guys is if your child is not connecting with people in person, that's a sign to get them therapy. That's a sign to check in, because a couple of things could be happening. Number one, they could be being bullied at school and not telling you, so they're feeling isolated, or there could be a social issue. So it could be something your child could learn and really develop quickly, a skill to be able to connect with people. And once they're connecting with people, hopefully their online use will go down. And then I'm going to talk about FOMO. So if you guys aren't familiar about FOMO is the fear of missing out. A lot of the kids will say that they're afraid of missing out on parties or on hanging out with their friends. And a lot of parents will come to me and they'll say, I just don't think it's okay for my kid to experience FOMO. Like, it's just jealousy. There's a lot of judgment of the idea of FOMO. But if you want to take a step back and really look at the idea of what FOMO is and what's happening online, it's really the fear of feeling isolated or the fear of not being socially connected, which is it's a pretty big deal for kids in their adolescence. So if they feel they're constantly being left out and they're not connecting with their social group, that's really going to hurt their self-esteem and their idea of their own self-worth. So, and then a lot of parents' reaction to that FOMO is to take the phone away. But when you take the phone away, you're taking away their connection again. So even if it wasn't COVID, that is where they're connecting. And now for sure, that's where they're connecting. So you really want to create a balance and understand what's happening when your child is telling you that they're experiencing FOMO, or that you notice that they get very jealous over kids doing things and not inviting them. The other big thing that I'm noticing now is that families are divided. Some families are potting up together so that other kids are jealous because these two kids are hanging out because the families have potted up together. Or there's families that are more lenient or don't have maybe as many health risks as another family, so they're letting people come over and then the other kid can't go over, and that's really also affecting them. So, but technology is not the problem there. That's just what's going on. So you really want to educate your kid, talk to them about that, and not jump to taking the phone out because they're experiencing that. Because overall, the phone is not the problem. The phone is a symptom of a bigger problem if you are having any of these issues with your kids. So the goal here is to be curious and observant and not to assume something bad is happening. If you're curious, if you're doing random phone checks, so again, elementary to middle school, I would say randomly phone check like once a week, once every 2 weeks. If you're constantly doing phone checks and you're finding nothing, you can go down to like once a month. But just go through the text messages, see who they're texting. You don't have to read the text messages unless you're really curious about a relationship, because that can be intrusive. But just noticing, who are they talking to? Who are they messaging on Instagram? Who are they talking to on Snapchat? Like, what does their social life look like online? you want to be really mindful to maybe even bring them in and be like, hey, we're going to do a phone check together. So in therapy, I do phone checks with most of my teenagers, but I sit down next to them and I have them go through their phone. So it doesn't feel like an intrusive invasion of their privacy. And as parents, it's, a lot of parents are like, well, I'm paying for the phone, so it's my phone. And that is true. And at the same time, you don't want your kid to feel like they have no privacy. And depending on the child, some kids aren't going to care. Some kids will give you their phone and walk away and not care. And other kids are going to be really worried about you going into their phone. And it's not that anything bad's going on. It's just that they might be embarrassed by what's on there, like relationship wise, right? So if you think about high schoolers as they're starting to date, or like later middle schoolers and they're starting to date and they're trying to, there's things that could be embarrassing for them. It doesn't mean that if your child's having a reaction that that something bad is happening on there. And the last part of the conversation, which I'm sure most parents are trying to figure out, is how to make limits your friend. So, if you ask yourself, what does setting limits look like and feel to you? If it feels uncomfortable, if it feels like you're setting limits and it's like, it's only punitive, or it's always causing a fight, so then you're like, I don't want to even go there today, I'm going to go there tomorrow. That means that you're doing limits wrong. Something's happening there, because if you can start off setting limits before something happens, it's going to be more effective for the family. Now, sometimes you might not think that you need to set a limit on something until a behavior happens and you're like, okay, we need to fix this. And being able to sit down with a child to have that conversation is helpful, versus just saying like, that's it, you lost your phone, or you can't game now for like a whole week or whole 2 weeks. Like, that's not going to work. And what I also notice is that when something happens and they're fearful of what's going to happen, their consequence is like too big. So the consequence is like, you can't game for 2 weeks, or you can't have your phone for a month. And the problem is that's not realistic. Eventually you'll probably give in. And then what that actually teaches the kids is that your limits and your consequences aren't going to be followed through. So it doesn't really matter what they do, because eventually they'll get what they want. So you really want to make sure that you're setting limits that you can follow through on and that makes sense. So you want to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. If they're not getting schoolwork done because they're always on their phone, it makes sense that you would take their phone away. If they're not cleaning their room because they're on their phone, it makes sense you would take their phone away. If they're not cleaning their room because they're overwhelmed because it's too messy, it doesn't make sense to take away their phone. If they're struggling at school and you see them doing their homework but they're still struggling, it doesn't make sense to take the phone away. I always tell parents, if they're getting bad grades at school or grades that you don't approve of, don't jump to the phone right away, check in, because that could be a sign of something else happening before you go to the phone. Because remember, the phone is your social connection. So if you're always taking the phone away or always taking the gaming system away, you're also hurting them socially. So you really want to make sure that it makes sense to take away the technology. And again, you want to have that idea that the phone is a privilege. So you can have that conversation with them and be like, you get to have this. It doesn't mean that it's yours for forever, but you get to have this if you keep showing up in appropriate behaviors. If you keep letting me know when things are going on, there's no problem. You can keep the phone, you can keep the limits the way that they are. But as soon as that shifts, then we have to have that conversation that things might change. So here are my some of the big tips that I give parents. So I'm gonna first pretend like nobody's giving their phone to their kids. If you have a kid that you're first giving a phone to, if you start off this way, it's gonna be really easy. And then I'll kind of give you little things that you can do if your kid already has their phone. So the first thing is not letting the phone in the bedroom at night. That's usually where kids are getting in trouble. That's usually where kids are staying up all night, FaceTiming, talking to people. So they're losing sleep and they're not doing well in school, and then it's like spiraling out of control. So if you can make the rule when you give your kid the phone that the phone doesn't go in at night, it's going to be normal for them. They're not going to want to take the phone in as they get older. Creating a charging station for the laptops, iPads. A lot of families will set something up in like the hallway where the bedrooms, and have all the chargers there, so people, when they get home from school, the kids know, I'm going to charge this here, and you always know where the technology is too. There's no hiding of the technology. And that helps keep the phone out of the room. Now, if you've already given your kid their phone and they're like, I use the phone for my alarm, I use it to listen to music before I go to bed, I've heard all the reasons why the phone needs to be in the room. And instead of fighting with them right away and saying like, no, it needs to be outside of your room, if they haven't done anything unsafe yet, You can say, okay, I just don't want you to charge it next to your bed, like on the nightstand. So if they have a desk on the other side of the room, they can go ahead and put the phone there and charge the phone there. So then when the alarm goes off, they have to get up and actually get the alarm. So they might even get out of bed more effectively than having the phone right next to them. And then I want you guys to kind of think of elementary school, middle school, and high school, and each of those that group of kids are going to have different limits and different rules. So in elementary school, 100% you want to have all their passwords. And, you know, I mean, I don't even think somebody in elementary school should have social media just yet. I think that they're still connecting with people outside. They're still, you're able to set up play dates. So it's to start them on social media and connecting socially through social media doesn't make sense yet. Once they get into middle school, they start making their own friends. They'll start making their own plans in middle school. That's when you might think about, okay, I'm going to let them have social media. And then you would have that conversation, what that looks like. And at that point, I would have your own social media accounts, know how to use Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. So if you are going to look at their phone and do a phone check, you know what those platforms look like. You don't have to personally use it, but you want to be familiar with the platform. And then the other thing is, I have parents of like early middle school kids actually log into their social media, not to spy on them, but every once in a while to check to see like, hey, is there any safety issues that I need to be worried about? So again, you're not reading through every message or every comment, but you're just kind of skimming through. And if anything looks fishy, then you can look at it and see like, hey, does my kid know this person, right? And making sure that their profiles are in private, not public. All the safety features are really important. And then once the kid gets into high school, I really encourage the autonomy. I really encourage letting your child experience what it's like to like wake up late or go to bed late and wake up late, or miss a class, or not do well on a test because they can't manage their phone time, before you jump in and problem solve for them. So you don't want to always be the fixer. You actually want them to experience what it's like to be ineffective with their phone a little bit. So then you're not the bad guy again all the time. They've actually created their own consequence. So random phone checks, like I've talked about a couple of times, random phone checks are not like an invasion of privacy, but they're just every couple of weeks, just to make sure there's nothing going on that's not okay. And it's, with the younger kids, it's usually, you want to make sure that you know who they're talking to. And then with middle schoolers, you just want to make sure that there's no, especially if they're dating, that there's nothing inappropriate going on. It's very easy for, a lot of the reasons why I get kids actually is because they take inappropriate pictures and they don't really realize they're inappropriate. And then, that kind of spirals out of control, and they might send it to somebody and then they'll send it to other people. So you just want to do a quick little check. And again, it's not like a reading through everything. It's just saying like, hey, what's on the phone? What apps do they have? And if you're not familiar with an app, download it, Google it, explore it yourself, so you're familiar with what's going on. So the goal here is to collaboratively talk about limits and set them together with your kids if you're able to do that. If your kid's giving a lot of pushback, I'm encouraging you to listen to their pushback, to validate that they're frustrated with it, and maybe say that you're going to think about it and come back with the limits. Because maybe if you step away, you might think, okay, maybe there is a middle ground, or maybe you're like, no, it doesn't make sense, right? I think that you can't, I think 4 to 5 hours of phone time is enough right now. But if you can validate and sit with your kids and listen, they're going to feel heard, and it's going to be less of a battle. Now, these are all tips for people who aren't having extreme issues with phone use. If your child is going over 9 to 10 hours, if your child's having any of those problem behaviors, it's going to look a little bit different. It's going to be individualized. There are cases where I do say like that black and white, take the phone away, because there is like definitely some addictive personality or addictive behaviors happening. And if there are addictive behaviors happening, you definitely want to take that away and try to work on their self-soothing skills in order to decrease the addiction to the phone, and then slowly reintroduce the phone to them. But at that point in time, that's why I really would encourage going to a therapist if you're noticing some of those problem behaviors. And that's my talk. So whenever you're ready, Jason.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It was really interesting. I don't see any questions yet from the audience, but I got a couple questions. I was taking some notes while we were going, and
yeah.
going back to almost the beginning of your talk,
Mhm.
you were give that example of your child sleeping in and validating the fact that they're tired first and then dealing with it later.
Mhm.
Um, when's the appropriate time to deal with it? Like, do you deal with it at breakfast or after school or in the evening? So just trying to get a little bit more.
Yeah. And that honestly depends on your child. So some kids you can talk to them at breakfast and they're going to be okay with it. Some kids are not morning, like they're just not going to anything you talk to them in the morning, they're not going to hear completely and they're not going to be in a good headspace. Ideally, it would be in the afternoon, so not right before bed and not right after school. Because they're also like kind of tired. So, and there's never going to be, you can't find the perfect time because I can pick out reasons why none of those times are going to be perfect. But in the afternoon, like once they've like come home from school and settled down, you can say to them, I've noticed that the last like 2 days, it's been really hard for you to get out of bed and you've almost been late to school. And the only thing I can see is your phone use. So we're going to try for the next week. We're just going to try this and we're going to put the phone over here. So it's not a forever thing either, even though you want it to be for forever and your intention might be that you're going to say, let's try it for a week and then talk about it. So you can bring them into that discussion. And like 90% of the time when parents do that for like a week or 2 weeks, the kids do realize and they will say to me, I actually felt better not having the phone on me all the time, or I felt better being able to have the phone away. But if they know that there's going to be room to talk about and not have it be very rigid, they're going to be more open to those limits. Because like I said, a lot of parents will, out of fear, get very rigid. And it's like, at this time, all the time, and that's it. When you get older, then the time changes.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying with the I feel better when I don't do this, and but I still, I guess I get back to like I feel better when I go gluten free, but I still can't get away from pizza.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's where if your kid keeps going back to behaviors and you're noticing that they feel bad when they've told you that, that's a sign that there's something else going on, right? So there's something, and most of the time it's not the technology per se that they might be like addicted to. A lot of times it's like relational stuff that's happening on the phone. So if they're like in a relationship that's like toxic, that's a time where you'll see where they won't want to give the phone up. And it seems to be that the phone's the problem, but it's really the relationships that are on the phone that are the problems. Which is why being curious and having that open lens is really helpful because you might be missing the problem completely.
And I really liked your ideas about creating a community with other adults. In doing something like that, do you suggest like talking to those people and like physically try, and having like, I guess, being more proactive about asking them to be involved, or is it just something that you think happens organically?
The goal would be it happens organically because you don't also want to be the overbearing parent that's telling the coach telling on your kid all the time or, telling on, the teacher. But if you're, if let's say, for example, the coach that, a sports coach, you're a really good tool to use. So if your child is struggling going to bed early, you might say to the coach, hey, I just want to let you know this is happening. If you could help me in any way. And then just so not asking them to do something specifically, but letting them know what's happening in your child's life is really helpful. A lot of coaches and teachers and tutors don't really take well, and rightfully so, with a parent telling them what to do. But it's important for the people that are in your kids' lives to know what's going on in their lives if they're struggling with something.
And but when we talked about the car right after school not being the right place to have a serious conversation, now, like, is that including like how was your day or what did you do today type conversation, or is that do you think is that included in that? And then if so, I guess it's the right time, like once you get home or at dinner, when what would you suggest?
Yeah. So again, this depends on your child. There's kids where you can be like, hey, how was your day? And they're like, good. And then that's it, right? And what happens is that parents then will probe and be like, well, what do you mean good? Like, did you do this? Did you do that? And like, so if they're giving you a one-word answer, that means like stop, but that's a greeting, right? Like, hey, how was your day? So it's not that you can't you can't greet them or you can't check in, but go with what your child is giving you. So if your child's talking, then yeah, talk. But if your child's not talking or is like putting on their headphones, it doesn't mean that they're being disrespectful. It doesn't mean that they hate you. It could just be that school's been a lot for them that day. Or, and sensory wise, for a lot of kids, it is a lot to be around all those people all the time. So just giving them that moment and then checking in once you get home and like, you unload the backpacks and stuff, you can check in then.
And then when you talked about setting limits, would you suggest that you and your child agree on the limits together, or is that something that parents just make the decision unilaterally and say this is the way it is until we're ready to revisit it at a later date?
Yeah, at first, if you can do it collaboratively, which means like you're listening, maybe you're like you're giving in a little bit, that would be great. But if your child's asking for something that's not like, if you and your spouse talk about it and you're like, this is what we feel comfortable with, right? It's like you're going into a negotiation, like we're not going to go lower than this number or higher than this number. So you have like wiggle room. You'll start off with some wiggle room, but you want them to feel included. If there's consistent problems though, you don't want them to feel like they have power. You want them to feel heard. So just because you're listening to what they're saying doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it or you're going to give in, but you want them to feel really heard. So sometimes kids will ask for things that are not appropriate. They will ask for like unlimited phone time and that they're going to manage their own phone time. But I can share a couple of times with some of my like middle schooler, like fifth graders, as they're starting to get social media, the parents will say, I only want like an hour of social media time. And they themselves will ask for the screen time limit them so they don't have to think about it and they'll stop. So they're wanting to be successful. You want to set your kids up to succeed, not to fail. So I've noticed that if you approach it that way, a lot of times, if you're not already dealing with other problems, a lot of times the kids will be open to those limit setting.
Great. Well, no questions came in from everybody online, and I don't have any other questions. So I'd like to thank you for your time today, and let you know I really appreciate it. And to everyone else online, we've got 2 more webinars coming up with other members at Therapeutic Oasis on supporting your children's emotional well-being and engaging in self-care activities with kids and teens. They'll be the next 2 weeks. I think they're both on Fridays, I believe. If you go to scorewebinars.com, there's a link to it. And we recorded this episode and we recorded last week, so we'll record the future ones. And the recordings are also on our website in our blog. And you should have no problem. If you have any issue finding it, just shoot me an email, jason@scoreatt.com. Happy Friday. Great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands. Thank you, Stephanie.
Bye.